Hello everybody, Thy Lord Root here, and welcome back to another KSP 1.0 tutorial. So today we are going to go to the moon, and in order to do that we will of course need to go to the VAB. So we're going to use everything we've learned up to this point, plus a few more things. And I guess the first thing is that we're going to design our mooncraft. Now, it turns out that besides getting into orbit, we also happen to need to transfer to the moon, land on it, take back off, and then get back to Kerbin. So there's a number of ways around that, of course. One of them, as it turns out, happens to be something like the following. If we take our budget here, our Delta V budget that is, bare minimum, if you're the best pilot you can be, you need about 750 or so meters per second to land on the moon, and 750 meters per second to get back to Kerbin. Maybe a little bit more, but we're usually not perfect, and so you usually want a little bit of leeway. There's also between 850 and 900 meters per second as well that we need to factor in. So just a few things here. Because we are going to be coming into the atmosphere at such a speed, it's a good idea to put a heat shield on your capsule. And really, we don't have to use this particular guy right here. There is another capsule here that is much better suited to this, though maybe not as a return capsule. So here, we can go to our aerodynamics, slip the heat shield underneath this guy, and this capsule can withstand about 2,000 or so degrees before it begins exploding. Now, of course, there are some other things we might want to put on it. For instance, a parachute. And this guy is actually lighter, or about the same size as the capsule. So what we can do is we can take this regular old parachute here, and we can go on in and just slap that down. We will need power because it'll take a couple of days to get there and back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, with four-way symmetry, this power up here. And I'm just going to tuck these guys in just a little bit with the offset tool. Okay, so that'll be our return capsule. And we need a decoupler to go under it. It's up to us now to decide how it is that we want to get off the moon, or how much Delta V we need, and I believe 2,000 is probably the best measurement here. And so, with this guy alone, if we use the 48-7S, we've got about 2,000 meters per second or so. That may begin to slip down, so we don't want to rely on it. But basically what we'll do is we'll take these guys here, and these are landing legs. These are usually pretty good. You can use these guys for slightly less mass. As you can see, that is causing us a few problems, and it's up to you really to decide, do you want monopropellant? Might be good for emergencies or for minor correction burns. But other things are that we want a ladder here. And you can get the ladders by going to the utility, and we will get this Telis LV Bay Mobility Enhancer. I'm going to turn off symmetry here, and I'm going to put this guy right here. Now, some testing will be required in order to determine whether or not we can reach the ground. That is something that we will need to think about. Because being able to reach the ground is a pretty good idea. It's a pretty good thing to... on the moon you don't really need to, you can jump. But we want to be able to do that. So, yeah. Solar panels, of course, will be next. And I think we could probably do with something kind of like this, to where we have two of these guys here. We may also want lights as well, and so that if we're on the dark side of the moon, we can see ourselves. And finally, may not be such a bad idea to have RCS jets on. Where's that center of mass? Center of mass is about here. I'm going to put 4 of them on. And I'm going to lock the suspension on this. Now you can deploy these, and then what you could do with them is you can do yourself a little bit of a test with them. I'm assuming that this is probably too high up, so I'm just going to bring it down a little bit, and maybe, well, that's probably a good place for it. Yeah, right now we could do a little bit better on that, so, one little trick here. Well, there's really 2 tricks. We can throw on one of these small tanks here. These toroidal tanks. Just to give us a little bit more fuel. That gives us about 2,000 or so, which should be good enough for our purposes. But anyway, we'll go up here and we'll action group some stuff. So I'll make number 1 the solar panels, and number 2 we'll toggle the ladder here. Anyway, what I was saying is with these landing legs you need to manually lock the suspension, even in symmetry. I'm going to call this Moon Lander. I already had one from various sorts of testing I'm doing here. But, we look at our thrust to weight ratio here. The moon is about 6 times the amount of gravity, or 1/6 the gravity, so we should have a thrust to weight ratio of 304, not bad. And we need to have this in order to allow this fuel just to slow down, because of course parachutes should only work in the atmosphere. Let's give this guy a shot. We'll put Valentina in there, or whoever happens to be there, I guess Jeb. It's your choice who you want to be in there, but I recommend a pilot. And let's see. Does our action group for the solar panels work? Yes, it does. How about our ladder? Is it going to go down far enough? Because, you know, it might be rather embarrassing to get to the moon just to realize that you can't get back in. If it tells you can grab, then when you hit the bottom like that, then you know that this guy's down far enough. And finally, if we hit off 12 here, we'll just hack the gravity a bit. I'm going to turn on SAS. And get this guy up pretty high. With the basic idea being that you want the sky to be able to come back in, and so the debug menu is good for that. So I'm going to hack gravity here, and I'm going to retract my ladder. And we can see if we hit F12 again, Alt F12, we can see the sky will come back in just fine. Now, one thing we may lose when we're re-entering is the ladder. But that'll be okay. We don't need the ladder to get back. We just need to see, you know, really where, what our surface velocity is. And that's about 5.5 meters per second once the parachutes are deployed. So now that the sky is more or less set up the way we want it to be, and I'm not quite sure what happened to my sound here. I guess I must have accidentally hit the button on my headset. Now we got this guy set up, we are going to want to build our transfer stage. Now our transfer stage is going to need about 900. I think it's a good idea usually to build in a little bit more, because you can use the sky to get back home, as it were. So we'll use the LV909 for this stage, because it has a little bit more kick. And I'm somewhat satisfied with that. That's a fair amount of delta V there. Now what we can do is, this guy's going to wobble a lot, so we want to put struts on it, and struts allow us to, they allow us to keep things attached to each other, and this is rather important. This is why it's sometimes referred to as space tape. Probably, in fact, wouldn't hurt to plan on using this guy as an injection stage, because well, it says here we're missing some delta V. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's because of the struts. I guess these guys are no longer massless like they used to be. That's not a problem. We can just come up in here like this and strut the sky down, and that'll be good for us. So, but yeah, it's usually a good idea to keep this guy around if you need to. And one thing I do recommend doing with this transfer stage is, if you go to the engines here, you don't want to create debris, right? So these separatrons are something that we're going to put here, and this is going to push this guy down into the moon, like that. And basically the idea is, let's say this guy's completely drained. When this guy is completely drained like that, oh, what's going on here? We'll just throw this on down here for when we separate. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this from the focus of the rocket. There's 371 meters per second or so when we release that. This has a pretty high thrust to weight ratio. And so it's a good bet that we can get this to crash into the moon. If we turn down our thrust some, I'm going to get it to thrust at 1G. That's with nothing in it. So, the basic idea behind this then is that, when we're done with this stage, we can dump it into the moon. We'll just come back over here now and get it to do its thing. Now we get to mess around with the 2.5 meter parts. So there's a question about what the appropriate amount of fuel is for this. And you know, we want to conserve as much fuel as possible. What we could do with this guy is we can take one of our engines. Maybe the skipper engine. This guy right here should have enough in the way of thrust to weight. And you can see it gets almost enough for our orbit. Thrust to weight, or the I'd rather maybe go with something more though. Maybe like I don't know, 3,700. I'm just kind of guessing at that. You can see that begins to bring our thrust to weight ratio down to a problematic point, rather. And not only that, these orange tanks, they overheat. They have a tendency, rather, to overheat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this at the bottom here. And that should give us a fairly good thrust to weight ratio. Whenever we hit maximum, we'll be going at about 4 Gs. Well, it's not so bad. One thing we could do, of course, is we could put boosters on the side, and that's what these radial decouplers are for. Is they allow you to put these things on the side so that you can say grab one of these guys here. And you can set them up however you wish. I'm going to put some nose cones on there for the purposes of aerodynamics. And I'm going to move this engine down so that they can all fire at the same time. And that'll give us a fair amount of delta V to work with. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to limit the thrust. Since we have that option, I'm going to limit it down to a $140, I think. And we'll want to strut these guys up too. And the easy way to handle this is, if you've got symmetry like this, you can click on the middle of the part you're trying to strut up on the side, and then go to the other end and it'll draw a more or less straight line. Fins are probably a good thing to have here, although we're beginning to get to the point to where fins make a little bit less sense. But we'll put those on there. And I'm going to go with these Delta Deluxe winglets. And then finally, we're going to put these launch stability enhancers, because this guy's balancing on its engine and we don't want it to do that. And finally, I was going to try and move that guy up. There we go. You know, finally, just a couple of things here. Our SRBs are going to be pointing in a rather inconvenient place here. We want these guys to be pointing in the plane that we're going to be moving at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit E and get this guy to rotate some. And that should be enough to get us to the moon. Now, if it's not, that could be a problem, but you can see we have excess in almost everything. I'm almost thinking I'm forgetting something, but you know, that's what this guy's for. Engines jettison before use. That's probably on this stage here, and that'll be okay. So let's take it out to the launch pad and let us now begin going to the moon. As you might imagine, the best time to go to the moon is the night, but we don't really need to launch at night per se in order for this thing to be effective. We could also launch during the day. For something like the moon, there's not as much benefit for it. But we're going to begin moving upwards here. And hopefully we will gain some amount of speed. With the idea being that we're going to try to get out of the atmosphere as soon as possible. I'm going to turn on flying control as well. And once we hit 50 seconds, I'm going to begin to very slowly pitch over. In the hopes that maybe by the time we hit 150 seconds, and we're already beginning to lose a little bit of inclination. But we're very, very highly inclined here. Oh, you know what? We're pointing the wrong way. Okay, let me revert that. Oh, I'm going into a polar orbit, that's why. Because we rotated the vessel. So we're actually wanting to go down here. Let's try this again. We'll raise our periapsis some using this. And we still have plenty of delta V here, so if I go here, ooh, something. What happened there? We can hit F3. Looks like the fairing came back and blew us up. But we have no choice now but to jettison that. And what we can do now is that since we're above the atmosphere, we can use this stage to get into orbit. That's 112 versus 113. That is so close that I think we're good doing that. Another thing we might want to do here, while we're waiting to get up to our apoapsis, that's called coasting to apoapsis, is maybe see if we can correct inclination a bit. It's a little bit cheaper here, although it's not that much cheaper. And really up until we get about halfway is when we want to stop. So there we go. I'm going to hit 1 to deploy our solar panels. And I'm going to hit this maneuver button, which will automatically take us to the maneuver. And we will just have to warp to that node. That's a 2-second burn or thereabout. And you can see we have a little bit of monopropellant left. Not a huge amount, but enough to perhaps be useful to us. I'm taking it along just so that we can do this trim maneuver here. And we should be... In fact, this is such a low burn, I'm going to start burning now. Well, there we go. So much for that. That's one of the things you have to watch out for with staging. But we have plenty of delta V with which to get to the moon, and it is probably now a good idea to quick save. So if you hit F5, you'll create a checkpoint that whenever you hit F9, if you screw things up, you can come back and do things. I'm just going to now, we want to be 90 degrees or so behind the moon, and the way we can easily tell this is if we zoom out. That will be about here, so the moon will move from this point. And we want to get this fairly low because we're going to try to utilize something called the Oberth effect. The Oberth effect basically means you get more efficient maneuvers. You get more efficient maneuvers whenever you burn at periapsis. If you're trying to burn outwards, that is, if you're trying to increase your if you're trying to increase your orbit, you want to do it at or decrease it rather, then the best place to do it is where your speed is highest. And we'll see that in action. As another consequence of the Oberth effect, if you were at apoapsis, that's usually the best time to descend. Anyway, there are other issues here, like, we might want to do an inclination change, and it's far better to do an inclination change out here. And this only really changes for launch. If you do it out here, though, there we go, we have a very, very tiny inclination change there. Not that we really need to change inclination at this time, but it can be helpful. Anyway, you want to get as close to the moon as is reasonable. One thing that would be unreasonable is maybe getting like 5 kilometers above the moon. That's just not usually a very good thing to do. So we're going to have some spare delta V here for braking our orbit, and maybe even some for descent. Now you might say, well, it's inefficient to bring all of this fuel with you. And you'd be partially correct, but you'd want some fudge factor room here. Because I'm not a perfect pilot, and chances are neither are you. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to, it says we can't auto-warp so far. I wonder why it is. It's not letting us, warp to the maneuver so easily. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll get him pretty close. And it says we need about 1 minute and 42 seconds. So, in that case, we are best off burning at about 51 seconds or so. I'm going to point towards the maneuver again and prepare for that. Now, if you're tired of this thing moving about like that, you can time warp and it'll stop it. I don't generally do that because it's pretty close to cheating. This doesn't have to be exact, but I'm just going to do that. You can see that was like some 18:30 seconds. We will have to burn out a little bit more, just for the time being. I'm going to rotate around like that. And you can see, by the way we're pointing, the moon should be coming up over the horizon pretty soon. That's usually the best way to tell. There it is, it's poking up. Usually you can hit the moon pretty easily if you burn right as it comes over the horizon. That's what we've done with this maneuver node here. I'm going to turn on stability assist here instead of burning towards the node because, well, when we kill this node, it's going to point directly towards the other node. We don't want that. Additionally, when we get close to this guy, we want to throttle down just a little bit because the more energy we put into the sky at this point, you can see our apoapsis is raising quite dramatically. So at about 50 seconds or so, I'm going to throttle back just a little bit so we can more easily see where it is that we're going to land. And I'm going to turn this off about here. We're almost at where we want to be. And you can use RCS, of course, to trim your orbit. So I'm down here at some 30 meters per second, and I'm going to now make a minor inclination change for 2.6 meters a second. At this point, you probably don't even need to have the maneuver open. It's just kind of there as a timing reference. So we'll warp to the next maneuver here. It'll give us about a minute. And this will allow us, this is probably going to point us in the, normal direction. But when this guy gets close, what we can do there is we can zoom in. The further you get out, by the way, the less precise these things have to be. And with RCS, you can fine-tune them. But we will watch this over here. and get this down about... We'll get this down as close to 0 as we can. And that point will be pretty soon. Again, does not have to be perfect. You want it as close as you can get it, however, because, well, let's take a look at that. We're at 42 meters per second. We can burn retrograde. Or actually prograde a little bit. Although that's actually not a bad place to enter in. Let's just see what happens if we do that. If we burn retrograde, we'll be about where we want to be. There are lots of considerations you'll have to make, of course, by doing this. One is, how close do you want to be? Do you want to be able to time warp real quickly? If so, then you need to be in a higher orbit. Well, I'm going to warp to this circle here. This is the SOI change. That's your sphere of influence. And when your SOI changes, then what ends up happening is that the moon's gravity ends up taking over. And so, you know, we've got this still now to where we are hanging around the moon. Now we want to do a periapsis burn here. In fact, we probably want to, at some point, save the game in a different save. But I'm going to put this guy here, and I'm just going to assume this is the best place. And this guy does not need to be as circular as possible here. But if you want it to be circular, then what you can do is you can zoom in with your mouse wheel here. And you can see I'm about where I want to be. That's more than good enough to me. I'm going to warp to the maneuver here. And it says that's going to take 1 minute 29 seconds. I'm not sure how much of that I believe, although we still have 419 seconds. So let's go to our maneuver here. We'll give it a small test burn. It's saying here 28 seconds. 24 seconds, in fact. So, you know, we can start at 12 seconds here and get ourselves into a nice orbit around the moon, at which point it would probably be good for us to zoom in. You can see our inclination, by the way. If we look at our orbital information, our inclination has not changed much, though it has changed. And so, you'll want to keep a handy eye on that. And once we're in orbit, like so, then might be a good time to quick save. So I'm going to do that. Now we have about 21,500 meters of delta V here, so it's just a matter of picking where we want to land now. And I've decided, you know, there are multiple places we could land. This crater is enticing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to periapsis, because we're close. And I'm going to lower this down just a little bit, maybe to, I think we'll be good if we get it to 5K. We can make further adjustments here as needed. We don't want to get it too low because then we'll crash into mountains. I believe the highest point on the moon is 7K, so it's important that we go nice and easy. But I think we'll be over most of these, and if you look on the map, it'll give you an idea of when you're too close. So I am now going to warp on in here. And we could land with this entire stack here, but we really don't have to. You can see how little delta V it takes at this point to get back down, or at least to get down to an orbit that we need. The biggest hassle, in fact, is probably going to be us getting not really just down to that I suppose that orbit, but preventing ourselves from colliding into the ground. That's going to be the hardest thing. So we'll give this a little bit of gas here in a bit. And I'm just going to watch my apoapsis here, make sure that we're not going too high. This seems like a pretty good spot to stop, so just a couple of things here. You can hit C to look out the capsule, and you hit C to get back as well. There's one of those high points, I reckon. We should probably begin thinking about braking around here. It's important to realize that the moon is rotating at this point, and so you do want to keep that in mind when you land. But because we have this high-powered engine on this stage, we're going to use that to get us back home, or to get us down, and then we'll have this weaker little engine to get us down. I'm just going to quickly get ourselves oriented here. And that will get us more or less into position. If we warp to the burn point here, this says some 18 seconds. Sometimes you lose the ability to click on these things, so that's something to keep in mind. Alright. We're at 47 seconds. Give us some time to look down here. And I feel it necessary for us to be pointing this way. Although, you know, really, I guess pointing this way where we can, with our window out, as we land, we can see where it is that we're about to land to. So 9 seconds in, you can see that we're already at the rim of the crater. And we're doing pretty well here. We don't want to go too far or too low here. We just basically want to follow this thing up. And I think we're in the crater now, so I'm going to try to kill as much horizontal velocity as I can. And I'm going to put down my landing gear. Now we want to be careful here. You hit G, by the way, that does the gear for you. We want to kill as much of our horizontal velocity as possible. But we don't want to be coming down so fast that we will crash into the moon. And another thing that's important is that if you don't have Engineer installed, and the chances of that rather are pretty high, then you will want to be able to land this thing without crashing into the ground, and the altitude that you will land it at is pretty high. In fact, we're coming up pretty high as it is. At least our horizontal speed is dropping. But you can see here we're pretty low down. So it's time for me to throttle back and make very fine adjustments here. You can go at sort of half throttle here. And you don't want to be moving around too much. Remember, these landing legs can only take so much. I'm going to turn on my lights to kind of give me an idea of how close I am to the ground. And then we'll use RCS here. And in this case, I had flipped over. Well, this sometimes happens when you land because you have a little bit too much residual velocity. So there's a couple of things you can do. You can do this one... oh, pardon me. If you have enough reaction wheels. And you can do this still to where this guy will pop you up, or you can rock back and forth. I don't really have that option here. However, I do have RCS. And so one possibility is that I can, pull back on here. However, this may be a rather difficult situation to get out of because of our center of mass, and that's something with the landing legs you do want to be aware of, because it's like an SUV. So, if you can't get it off the ground, and it seems like we're more or less on the side of can't. If you can't use the reaction wheels, that is, to prop you up, then there's always the option of reloading that quick save. So in this case, we took a little bit too aggressive of an approach. I'm going to hit F9 now. Okay, we are beginning to come down now. And I'm just going to do my best to get this guy coming down at a reasonable pace. I'm essentially hovering over the surface looking for a landing spot. And you'll see here, if we hit C and look at our window, really two things are happening. We can see the ground below, and we can see this radar altimeter as well. And that radar altimeter is going to give us some idea of how close we are. So, if you have a wide base, you might wish to use it. However, in this case, we are a little bit top heavy. So I'm just going to come down to 15 meters per second here. Maybe see if we cannot find a good place to land. You want an area that's relatively flat so we don't tip over again. And maybe one that's kind of out of the way. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving over just a little bit. I need to cut my throttle some, so we descend a little bit more. Because I believe we will probably end up on a slope. Whoa, what has happened here? Orbital velocity, no wonder. Okay, let's maybe go this way. That seems to be the best thing to do. You want to be careful about that. Just because, you know, you can waste a lot of fuel, but that slope seems to be a little bit too much for us to handle. As does that one. So it's a good thing we brought a lot of Delta V along, because in this case, we're not in the best way to find places to land. In fact, we will tip over probably because of that hill. And as long as we keep maybe 900 or so meters per second of Delta V in reserve, I believe we will be okay. And I'm just going to hover around here. This looks like a much better place to land. Now, of course, if you end up in a situation like this, it could be helpful to use RCS to help you land. And again, best advice, watch the nav ball. And hopefully, that you want to get rid of as much of this horizontal speed as you can, because you will tip over. But we've managed to not tip over. We have about 1,000 meters per second of delta V. I'm going to autosave, and then we're going to go do our surface things real quick. So, yeah. Let's just, deploy the ladder. Let's bring Jeb out here. And Jeb will, of course, do a number of things. What kind of things can he do on the moon anyway? Well, he can jump for joy, and you can do that if you hit space. Of course, this isn't Super Mario Brothers, so if you jump around, you might want to use your EVA fuel to move around while you're in the air, and that is, of course, you hit R. You can do shift to thrust upwards and control to thrust down. And then what we will do is we'll take an EVA report, even though for career mode, or not for career mode, but for sandbox mode, it's kind of pointless. And then you can plant a flag. And this is what most people do in sandbox mode. So, yeah. We will go ahead and we'll just say, finally. Because I've actually, one of the things that could change about this design is its center of mass. The landing legs need to be a little bit forward of it. But other than that, we're good. We can climb up the ladder. Be sure to hit B and not F if you're a veteran. And I'm going to quick save. And now what we can do is we can get back into orbit. So how do we achieve that? Well, the best way to do it is to just go ahead and burn towards 90. You'll want to give yourself ample time to get into orbit, and you'll probably want to very slowly do it. But, and I recommend maybe an orbit of like 20 or so meters per second. Or not meters per second, 20 kilometers. And part of the reason for that is that it'll make time warp a little bit easier. So do your gravity or your pitch program just like you might your gravity turn, just to kill off some of the excess velocity. And you will see before too long that you will have an orbit. And in the moon's weak gravity, it's actually not that hard to pull off an orbit. Now here's a question, do we have monopropellant? Unfortunately no, we do not. But I don't think we'll need it. There we go. That is good enough for an orbit. And it'll take us 10 minutes, but to circularize it'll take just about nothing. And we don't particularly need to accurately circularize either. So we'll point at the node. We will warp to the next maneuver. And then we will get into orbit. And hopefully we won't miss our periapsis. It's going to be a little bit difficult if we do. But, I'm feeling good about this. So there we go. More or less circular orbit. And now we need to find a way to get out of here. And the way I recommend that is, you want to burn towards Kerbin. So you want to pick this point here, which is about 90 degrees ahead of it. And you can just start moving these guys around. You don't want to go too fast. You should ideally need about 200 meters or so, 250 meters per second. And you can move your maneuver node around until you get an altitude that allows you to skim the atmosphere. So we're just going to bring this guy in. The 300 is usually ideal for this. Oh, and I'm going to probably brake at about 30 kilometers. We could have almost done our braking there, but we won't do it that way. That'll take about 31 seconds or so to make happen. So we're almost up on that node there. It'll be happening a little bit sooner than later, but I'm just going to move forward to about 15 seconds or so. And that will allow us to, it'll allow us to very easily get out there. Now again, you kind of want to micromanage your burn here. So now we're pointing in the right way. I am just going to kill this. I'm going to watch to see about where we come down. And if we come down around 30 kilometers or so, let's say, that's going to be okay. Now, we unfortunately we used all of our RCS during landing, so we're gonna have to manage this with the engine. Fortunately, we have this tiny engine that we can use. But let's zoom out to our escape here, or warp out rather. And we are almost there. Just got a little bit to complete here. Time warping through SOI is not usually a good idea. There's this. There we go. Yeah, we're at about 30 seconds here. So you know the song and dance with this by this point. You can, of course, use this to brake if you find it favorable. And you will notice the velocity begin to kick up here. In fact, I'm just going to maintain retrograde for now. We have plenty of batteries. And there we go. We may, find it good just to slow down. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near where we want to. So I'm going to use what remains of that fuel there. Probably not a bad idea at this point to go ahead and deal with that. I think too we need to retract our ladder. That ladder is a notable weak point on this craft. But you can see we've had to break a lot here just to get down. So that thing has survived somehow. I'm gonna get rid of it. Sometimes you have to. And we will hit the parachutes before too long. And I think it is going to be time for us to do that right about now. In fact, you can tell by looking at this altimeter if you want to. We know that there's a bit of a delay on the parachutes, so it's good to slow down as soon as you can. And there we go. The chutes are open, and we will land soon. So that's about a trip to and from the moon. When we're done, I believe what we'll do next is we will maybe put a space station into orbit. But until then, this has been Thy Lord Root, and I will see you later.